Hey everyone, I'm JD Peabody and I'm the author of the Inkwell Chronicles, the Ink of Elspet. I'm really excited to talk with you about it today because this is my first children's novel and it's been a lot of fun for me to write, and I wanted to just share with you a little bit about the book itself and also my process of becoming an author. Since most of you haven't probably read it yet since it's brand new, let me give you a little background on the story. It's set in the 1950s in Great Britain, and it follows the adventures of Everett and Bea Drake, a brother and sister who go on this quest to find and rescue their father who's gone missing after a train crash. And along the way, they encounter this incredibly powerful ink that is behind all the great stories of the world. And it's in short supply, and there are villains out to get it, so Everett and Bea have to find more of it and protect it. And this book is really a combination of real-world events and fantasy. I tried, as I was going through, to weave in all these references to actual authors and stories and places and events that you as a reader could discover for yourself as you're going through it. And then, of course, I added in all these fictional elements that I just made up myself just for fun. But the book really is about the power of creativity, because this ink is the source behind all this creativity. And it's also the story of finding your own voice, because Everett is discovering who he really is, what he's all about, what he has to offer the world, and he's gaining confidence in himself. That gives you a little bit of background on my book, but I'm sure all of you have your own favorite books that matter to you. So for the next minute or so, I want to give you an opportunity to turn and talk to somebody next to you. Tell them what your favorite book is and why. We'll set the timer for 1 minute, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more. It's fun to talk about our favorite books, but have you ever wondered how a book actually gets made? How is it that it goes from being just an idea that somebody has into being something that's actually printed and on the shelf? Well, every book has a story behind it, and they're all different. My story begins a long time ago, actually, with a favorite book that I had back when I was in about 4th grade. So a really, really long time ago. My parents bought me a copy of a book called Prince Caspian. Have you ever heard of that book? Some of you have probably read it before if you've read the Chronicles of Narnia. But if you've read it, then you know that it's not the first book in the series. My parents bought me the book in the wrong order, the wrong sequence. But it didn't even matter. I started reading that and I was just pulled in. It was the first time that I remember a book really transporting me to this other world entirely. Have you ever had that experience where you're reading something and you love the story so much that you kind of forget about where you are? That was that book for me, the first time that I really remember getting hooked on reading. Well, I didn't have any idea that that book would have anything to do with me ever writing anything. I never thought that I would go on to become an author of a book myself, but it just sort of was there in the back of my mind as something that had had this impact on me. And then it wasn't until years and years later, clear until the year 2014, that was when I first had my idea for my book, and I had no idea that it would actually come from this same series. 2014 was actually a really difficult year for me personally. I had some things going on that were really tough. And writing for me became this outlet that was really helpful for me in getting through it. And I share that because I just want to say, if you're going through a hard time, you might think that that's making it more challenging for you to write right now. But I would encourage you to go ahead and write anyway, because the writing itself might be a way for you to get some energy out, get some feelings out that would be really helpful. But back in 2014, I got to thinking about that series, The Chronicles of Narnia, and I thought about one of the other books in that series called The Magician's Nephew. And in that book, there are all these rings. Half of them are yellow and half of them are green. And the green ones take you to a different world and the yellow ones bring you back. And at the end of the story, they had all these leftover rings that they buried in the ground around this tree. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if somebody were to move into that house years later, if you could come up with a whole new story about them digging in the dirt and finding these rings and going to new places. And I thought that could be kind of interesting. And I got all excited thinking about what I might be able to write. Well, but then I reread the last book in that series, The Last Battle, and lo and behold, the author C.S. Lewis had those characters actually dig up those extra rings, and they took them on a train and they were lost in this train crash. And I was like, great, there goes that idea. That's not going to work at all. But then I started thinking about train crashes. And I began to wonder if there might be a real live train crash that was in C.S. Lewis's mind as he was writing. And I started to do a little research. And it didn't take me long to come across a really major train crash that happened just a few years before that book came out. And it was one of the worst in the history of Great Britain. And there's still all this mystery. Nobody really knows what caused that train crash. And so I started to think, what if you could create this sort of fictional cause behind what happened there and weave that into a story? Well, that proved to be just the little spark that got me going and became the beginning of my story, the Inkwell Chronicles. So you can see I had this thread that went all the way back to 1977 and didn't become a story idea until 2014. And then it was 2015 that I actually put a first draft of this book together. Now, at this point, I really didn't know if I could write a book. I'd done a lot of writing over the years in my life, but it had all been in a much smaller, shorter context. I had written songs, I'd written poems, I worked in advertising, so I had written jingles and short commercials, but nothing that was on the scale of a book. And then I wrote a screenplay once, and that began to give me some confidence that I could write something a little bit longer. And so I thought, I'm going to try this book. And I didn't even know how the book would unfold. I just kind of had the very bare minimum ideas for it. But I thought, you know what? I'm not going to wait until I have the full picture. I'm just going to start writing. So I wrote one chapter, and then another chapter, and then another chapter, and just kind of followed it as it unfolded before me until in 2015, I ended up with this complete first draft. I thought this story was amazing. I thought it was ready for the world, that everybody would be as excited about it as I was. But those of you who have ever written a first draft before know that that's also called your sloppy copy. It's full of mistakes and things that need to be fixed, but you just got something out on the page. So I was confident in this, that it was ready for the world. And so I reached out. I knew that if you wanted to get a book published, the first thing to do was to get an agent. A literary agent is the person who takes what you've written and then they turn around and they sell it to a publisher. And so I thought, okay, I need to get an agent. So I began to send this first draft out to all these people. And one by one, they got back to me and said, no, I'm not interested. This isn't good enough. I don't like it. all these rejections, one after another, big thumbs down. And I would send out another batch. I sent out to over 100 literary agents who all turned me down. And along the way, though, there were a few nice ones who also would give me some feedback and tell me a little bit more about what they didn't like about the story, what needed to be improved. And so I would edit and edit and edit, and I just kept working and working, trying to make this be the best story I could make it. Well, eventually, after all that work, that paid off, and I did find a literary agent who said, yeah, we love this story. We think we can sell it. And so they took it from me, and they turned around, and they began to pitch it to different publishers, and they sent it to over 35 different publishers who all came back and said, no, no, no. And again, some of them gave some feedback that said what could be improved. And so again, I edited and edited and edited. And then finally there was one publisher who said, we love this. We want to publish this and print this for you. And they too had some changes, though, some corrections that they thought could make this an even better story. And so I edited some more. And that was in 2021 when I finally had that book deal. And then it was another year of editing before it was ready and is finally on the shelves now in 2022, where you can actually buy the book. That's a really long process for this book to come into being. And I'm now working on the sequel. But the sequel isn't going to take nearly as long to develop because the universe is already there, the characters are already there, and because I know so much more about the writing process and the publishing process. And I know more how to write a good story. Well, what about you? If you could write a story right now, if you had some powerful ink at your disposal and could write anything, what would it be about? I'm going to give you a minute to turn and talk with somebody next to you, tell them your story idea, and then we'll set the timer and we'll come back and talk a little bit more. I hope you do end up writing some of those ideas. And if you do, I wanted to share some things that I've learned along the way that might be helpful for you in your process as you're starting out. The first thing I would say, as you're writing, you find your voice by trying it. You find your voice by trying it. If you don't know how you would say something or exactly what you would say, just try something and see how it fits. I know as I was being edited along the way, a lot of people would offer me suggestions, and sometimes I would try them and go, oh, that's just not how I would say it. And I didn't know that until I tried it. And so just begin experimenting and see how it is that you want to communicate things, because eventually you'll find your own style and your own voice. The second thing I would say is don't worry about if it's good, just write. Just get something out there. You know, here's the secret. When I wrote that first draft that wasn't that great, I needed to write it not that great and get it out there because it was the best I knew how to do at the time. And it was only by letting other people see it and read it and give me feedback that I could actually grow and improve it. So I say, write something even if it's not that great, and then be open to listening to ways that you can get better as a writer and make the next version a little bit better. So don't worry if it's all that great. Just begin to write and have fun with it. The next thing I would say is that editing is your friend. it's good to keep that in mind when people are offering you feedback and you don't necessarily want to make changes, but to be open and always keep in mind the good of the story. How can you improve the story and make it the very best it can be? I find it's helpful when I'm listening to things that critics are telling me to listen for the nugget in what they're saying. If it feels mean when they're offering some things that say they don't like it, to really go, okay, what are they getting at? What's something that I can take away that's a little treasure in here that can work to my advantage and help this story become a better story? So what's the nugget in there? And then I would say, follow your joy. I already shared that it was when I was having a hard time that I began to write, and that writing really was a place for my brain to kind of get some relief from what was going on in the real world, and it was this safe, fun place for me to be, and I enjoyed that so much. And every time that I had to make changes and get back into that world and be with those characters, I loved it every step of the way. And so I would say find something that you really enjoy thinking about and writing about, and follow that and stick with what is really feeding you as you're writing. So those are some things that have been helpful for me, and I'm glad to have the chance to share with you. I want to leave you with a quote from the author of the Chronicles of Narnia that I think is a really good one. C.S. Lewis once said, "You can make anything by writing." And I think the first thing that you make with writing is a writer. You become a writer by writing. And like Everett in my story, each one of you has your own voice. And it's a unique voice. You are the only person who can be you. You're the only person who can share your experiences, your perspective with the world. And the world needs to hear your voice. So I encourage you, whether that is through writing or whether that's through art or something else, find a way to express your thoughts and your feelings in the world, because we need to hear what you have to say. If you would like to find out more about my books and my writing, you're welcome to check out my website, jdpeabody.com. Send me more questions there. I'd be happy to respond to you in that. And I also have a secret page on that website. If you look for this thing, there's a picture of this on my website, and if you can find that and click on it, you'll find some more background information on my book that talks about some of those people and places and events that are sort of hidden within the story. So thanks so much for taking the time to listen and watch this today, and I look forward to someday reading what you have to write.